Imagine a country where half the land holds barely 9% of its people, fewer than live in New York City, while the other half overflows with more than 80% of Americans. There's a reason the population crowding stops dead at a line running from North Dakota to Texas. This isn't a fluke of history, but the consequence of a climatic barrier so powerful, it still shapes where tens of millions live and where opportunity dries up. But what exactly drew this invisible boundary? And why haven't we crossed it? Draw a line straight down the center of the United States, from the Canadian border in North Dakota to the southern tip of Texas. This is the 100th meridian west, a boundary that slices the country almost perfectly in half by land area, but not by people. To the east of this invisible line, cities sprawl, highways crisscross, and more than 80% of Americans make their homes. West of the line, the landscape stretches wide and empty. In fact, if you took the entire population living in the vast region west of the 100th meridian, excluding the bustling coastal cities of California, Oregon, and Washington, you would have fewer people than in New York City alone. That is just 9% of the country's population spread across half the mainland. The 100th meridian isn't marked by fences or signs, but its influence is unmistakable on every population map. The line runs through places like Dodge City, Kansas, and Abilene, Texas, slicing through the heart of the Great Plains. On one side, dense clusters of towns and farmland thrive. On the other, settlements grow sparse, separated by miles of open prairie and desert. This divide has held steady for generations, even as the nation's population has doubled, tripled, and shifted with the times. The question isn't just where the line falls, but why it has kept so many millions on one side, and why, even today, so few cross over to settle the other. Moisture-laden winds sweep in from the Pacific Ocean, carrying rain and snow toward the continent. As these winds reach the Rocky Mountains, they are forced upward, cooling rapidly and dropping most of their water on the western slopes. Cities like Seattle and Portland, nestled on the coast, can receive more than 40 inches of rain a year. Some mountain forests see over 100 inches. But the journey does not end there. Once the air crests the Rockies, it descends the eastern slopes. Now dry and warm, it races across the plains, pulling moisture from the land instead of giving it back. East of Denver, annual rainfall plummets to less than 14 inches. This is the classic rain shadow effect, and it stretches for hundreds of miles. The Rockies act like a giant wall, stripping the clouds of moisture and leaving the interior west parched. Ranchers in Wyoming and Nebraska know the pattern well. Short grass, brittle soil, and long spells between storms. Meanwhile, another force moves north from the Gulf of Mexico. Warm, humid air rides up through Texas and the Midwest, bringing steady rainfall to the eastern half of the country. But when this Gulf moisture reaches the 100th meridian, it meets drier air descending from the west. The winds shift and the rain clouds break apart. East of the line, fields of corn and soy stretch for miles, fed by 30 to 50 inches of rain a year. West of it, the land turns brown and open, shaped by the absence of water. The invisible boundary is not just a line on a map. It is a clash of skyborne forces, written in every blade of grass and every empty stretch of prairie. In the early 1800s, as American explorers pushed beyond the Mississippi, their journals began to paint a picture that defied the green promise of the East. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, sent by President Jefferson to map a route to the Pacific, crossed the Great Plains in 1805 and found a landscape unlike any they had known. Their notes described endless grasslands, few trees, and rivers that vanished into dry earth. Clark wrote of the immense plains of the Missouri, where the soil turned to dust and shade was a rare luxury. These were not the fertile fields settlers imagined, but a threshold where water became scarce and the rules of survival changed. Decades later, John Wesley Powell, geologist, explorer, and Civil War veteran, set out to measure these dry lands with science. After rafting the Colorado River, Powell turned his attention to the vast interior west of the 100th meridian. In 1879, he warned Congress that the land beyond this line received less than 20 inches of rain a year, far too little for traditional farming. Powell's landmark report spelled out a hard limit. Only areas with more than 20 inches of annual rainfall could reliably support crops without irrigation. East of the line, rain-fed agriculture was possible. West of it, only ranching or dryland techniques stood a chance. Powell's findings were clear, but his warnings landed on deaf ears. Politicians and land promoters clung to the dream of an unlimited frontier, while the facts of aridity gathered in the journals and reports of those who had walked the land. The divide between promise and reality would soon shape the fate of countless settlers. Railroad engineers faced the dry heart of the continent with a mix of calculation and hope. Grenville Dodge, chief engineer of the Union Pacific, surveyed the Great Plains in the 1860s, searching for a route that could support steam engines and towns. The track hugged the line where rainfall still allowed for water stops and farming, rarely straying far from the narrow corridor with just enough precipitation to keep trains running and settlements alive. By 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad joined east and west at Promontory Summit, but its main arteries skirted the truly arid interior, anchoring new cities like Denver just east of the rain shadow. Promoters and speculators eager to fill these new lands spun a different story. Brochures promised that the plow itself would bring rain, that cultivation would transform the dry plains into gardens. The phrase "rain follows the plow" became gospel in land offices and newspapers. Railroad companies holding millions of acres granted by Congress hired agents and published pamphlets to lure settlers west, painting the prairie as a land of endless potential. Some migrants arrived believing the climate would change for them. Many would later face the hard limits of drought. Theodore Roosevelt, a rancher before he was president, saw both the promise and the peril of Western settlement. In 1902, he signed the Reclamation Act, channeling federal money into dams and irrigation canals. These projects aimed to conquer the dry West, turning rivers into lifelines for towns and farms. Yet even as water flowed to new fields in California's Central Valley and along the Salt River in Arizona, the vast majority of the interior remained too dry for large-scale agriculture. The grand schemes of railroads and reclamation could not erase the boundary drawn by rainfall. The myth of limitless land collided with the reality of the climate, shaping where Americans would ultimately put down roots. Nearly 3/4 of people living west of the 100th meridian are packed into a thin coastal strip, from San Diego to Seattle, where Pacific storms still deliver steady rain. Inland, the story is different. The Colorado River, once seen as a limitless source, now struggles to meet the needs of 40 million people. Reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell sit at just 30% of their capacity, exposing cracked mudflats where water once ran deep. The mega drought gripping the West has lasted for over 2 decades, pushing cities and farms to the edge. Meanwhile, the line where dry land begins is shifting east, moving closer to the Midwest each year. The old boundary that shaped the nation's settlement is on the move again, and for millions, the question of where water will come from is more urgent than ever. Strip away the Rocky Mountains, and the entire pattern changes. Climate scientists have run computer models that erase the mountain barrier, letting Pacific moisture sweep straight across the continent. The result is dramatic. Rainfall spreads evenly, turning the interior West from dry grassland and desert into fertile plains. In this scenario, the 100th meridian loses its power. The sharp divide between wet and dry disappears. GIS projections suggest that if the Rockies never existed, America's population would likely settle in a near 50-50 split between East and West. Cities could rise in what's now Wyoming or Nebraska, just as easily as in Ohio or Georgia. The familiar clusters along the coasts and river valleys would give way to a much more balanced map. Geography, more than any law or invention, has always been the strongest force guiding where people put down roots. As climate shifts push the precipitation divide even farther east, the line that once shaped America's population is on the move. Water scarcity, not just history, now redraws the map. The real boundary isn't geographic, it's how we choose to adapt. Share your thoughts below.